My name is Steve Williams, and I am going to be the facilitator for today's discussion. And we're really, really lucky to be having this discussion today. One, because of just the historical context that this discussion takes place in. Obviously, talking about Freedom Summer at the 50-year anniversary is an important thing. But also we're at a particularly auspicious moment where a lot of the civil rights leaders who played a key and instrumental role in building Freedom Summer and the civil rights movement are starting to pass away, and it's starting to open up real questions about where is the next generation of leadership coming from. And SNCC, I think, set an incredible example 50 years ago of demonstrating not only the potential of young people to be able to offer leadership in the future, but actually the capacity to be able to offer leadership at that particular moment. And we've got an august panel of speakers today. And so we're going to really dig into this question about what is the role of youth movements in trying to make radical social transformation. And we'll be looking at specific experiences that are coming out of South Africa as well as the United States, and really trying to draw the connections between Freedom Summer, the experiences in very different national contexts, but what are the lessons that we can draw going forward. So I'm going to quickly introduce the panelists, and then we're going to get into the discussion. Most of the structure, so that everybody knows, is going to be a little bit more talk showy. So we're hoping to have more of an honest and intimate conversation with one another, both the panelists with one another, and then also all of us with each other. So there'll be a series of questions that we'll go through as opposed to just sort of the standard elevator speech talk. So on my far left, and hopefully not your far right, we have Dmitri Holtzman, who is the executive director of the Equal Education Law Center. Dmitri was born in Cape Town, and after spending time in Pretoria, he wound up graduating high school in the Cape. He obtained his BA from the University of Cape Town in 2006, after which he completed his LLB at the University of the Western Cape in 2009. While at university, Dmitri was the national chairperson of the Students for Law and Social Justice. And at the same time, he was a student volunteer with Equal Education. And in 2010, after graduating, he took up a full-time position as a researcher and parliamentary liaison officer in Equal Education's Policy, Communications, and Research Department. And then he later became the deputy head of that department until 2011, when he became the executive director. So thank you for joining us, Dmitri. Next to Dmitri, we have Brad Brockman, who is the general secretary of Equal Education. And Brad is the general secretary of Equal Education, which is the largest school reform movement in South Africa, which organizes students and parents to campaign for quality, greater quality, and equality in the country's educational system. Brad joined Equal Education in 2010, and before being elected General Secretary in 2012, he worked as a researcher and editor at Equal Education and started the organization's parent organizing and led its youth organizing. In 2012, Brad was selected as one of the Mail and Guardian's top 200 young South Africans. It's a big country too, so. And in 2013 was selected as part of the first cohort of the Open Society Foundation's new Executive Director Award. And Brad holds a bachelor's in history from the University of Cape Town. These introductions are going to be a little bit long. I told you it was an august panel, so I want to make sure that you understand the gravity with which people come into this discussion. And so next we have Sofia Campos, who was born in Lima, Peru, and then raised in Los Angeles, California. Sofia became involved in the immigrant youth movement while she was at UCLA in 2007. While in school, she taught UCLA's first ever undocumented and unafraid seminar and organized with the California Dream Act, the Federal Dream Act, and the Right to Dream campaigns. After graduating, Sophia became the project coordinator at the UCLA Labor Center's Dream Resource Center, where she led the national book tour for Undocumented and Unafraid, and the nation's first freedom school utilizing popular education curriculum focused on immigrant rights and identity. She's the board chair of United We Dream, which is the first and largest network of undocumented youth, immigrant youth, and she holds a master's, she is a master's student, and she's soon going to get it, in city planning at MIT. And then next to me, we have Ahmad Abuznaid. Damn, I had such a choice. Who is the legal and policy director at Dream Defenders. Ahmad is one of the co-founders of Dream Defenders, which is a Florida-based nonprofit that was started up in the wake of the Trayvon Martin tragedy. And that organization has been working to end the systemic injustice and build collective power throughout the state, throughout the South, and throughout the country. Ahmad was born in East Jerusalem, Palestine, and it was there that he first developed his interest in social justice. And after finishing middle and high school in Fort Lauderdale, Ahmad attended Florida State University, where he received his bachelor's in international affairs with a minor in business in 2006. And then Ahmad later received his JD from the Florida Coastal Law School in 2011, and is a member of the Florida board. So please join me in welcoming our panel members. So, I mean, obviously there's sort of very different contexts that all of you are coming into this work and coming into this conversation with. And so what I wanted to do is start off giving everybody an opportunity to talk about the context in which your work is taking place and to describe a little bit about the work that you're doing. So maybe we'll start in the Global South with South Africa, and Brad, maybe you could kick us off.
Okay, fine, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So in South Africa, under apartheid, schools were segregated according to race and ethnicity. And there was a policy which was called Bantu education. And that policy deliberately, underfunded and under-resourced black schools and created a system, an education system, which was essentially educating black children for servitude, right? And for white children for lives of privilege and power. And so, for example, in 1976, the apartheid government was spending 10 times as much on the education of every white child than they were on every black child in South Africa. And we're living with that legacy today. So in 1994, when South Africa achieved democracy, schools and public facilities are no longer segregated by race. Okay? But schools are very definitely still segregated, but by class. So in South Africa, public schools, schools which actually receive money from government, they're not all free. Okay, 60% of schools in South Africa, 60% of public schools are free, and they're not allowed by law to charge fees. But 40% are allowed to charge school fees. Okay, now schools which were built under apartheid and resourced under apartheid, those schools are allowed to charge fees. Okay, so you have a situation where the wealthy and well-resourced schools are now allowed to charge fees, and what that does is it automatically excludes poor and working class children who are black. Okay, but it includes white children and middle class black children. Okay, so the children of the political elite, of civil servants, of businessmen and women, those children, go to these well-resourced schools, and there's a massive disparity in the quality of education at these two schools. And so in South Africa, when we talk about the education system, in fact, it's more accurate to talk about two education systems, two public education systems. Okay, and what that creates and what that perpetuates is social and economic inequality in South Africa. Now, the differences that you'll see between the schools in the two education systems that spans the whole gamut of the factors which go into making a quality education. So we're talking about infrastructure. We're talking about the number and the quality of teachers. We're talking about school leadership and management. The whole range of factors, and very importantly, we're talking about outcomes as well. Okay? So in South Africa, there's a high school dropout rate of about 50%. I've read somewhere that in the US we're talking about 7%. We're talking about 50% in South Africa. And it's overwhelmingly, or it is the children who are going to these poor and working class schools that are dropping out. Okay? Just in terms of percentages, or just a general sense of, when I talk about, those schools that have and that are resourced and that are, produce outcomes, and those who do not, we're talking about, let's say 25% of South African schools are the ones that, offer a quality education. Okay, 75% of schools do not, and that's where the dropout rate, that's where the low outcomes, are produced. Now, Equal Education as an organization was established as a grassroots response to this inequality. Okay, and we're an organization that organizes high school students in poor communities and who attend these schools, and their parents, because we believe that those are the people who stand the most to gain, and those are the people who need to be in the forefront of efforts to challenge and to change that system. So what we do is, grassroots organizing. So we have members across South Africa, students and parents, maybe let's say about 5,000 of them, who come to weekly meetings. Those young people then go and organize other young people within their own schools. Those weekly meetings are about political education, where young people learn about the education system in South Africa, where young people learn about how inequality within that system is structured through law, through policies, through budget allocations, etc. Okay? It's also where young people learn about history, where they learn about the example of the anti-apartheid struggle, where young people played a very central role, a very key role in efforts to challenge Bantu education and to challenge apartheid rule. Young people who are members of our organization learn about the civil rights struggle. They learn about efforts to abolish slavery. And they also have an opportunity to talk to each other about what are the issues that they are facing in their own particular schools. And through that interaction, through that conversation, young people also identify issues that they want to take up. Okay? So young people identify things within their own particular school that they want to run campaigns on. Okay? And as an organization as a whole, we also identify systemic factors, so the laws, the policies, the resource allocations, that if we were to run a mass campaign about, we could actually see reform. And so since 2008, the organization has run successful campaigns to improve, local school infrastructure, to get, toilets improved and more toilets, allocated to schools. We've run campaigns around increasing access to textbooks, additional teachers for poor schools, and we've successfully concluded a campaign which was all about, getting the National Minister of Education in South Africa to set legally binding school infrastructure standards. So because of the underdevelopment and the underfunding of black education under apartheid, and because of a very slow pace of addressing that particular challenge since 1994, we still sit in a situation today where thousands of schools lack access to water, electricity, toilets, or some schools who have access to those have got irregular access to those resources. And when we talk about libraries and computer centers, you're talking about a real minority of schools. So only something like 7% of schools in South Africa actually have access to stocked school libraries. Okay, so our organization, we are a campaigning organization, a grassroots movement. Our campaigns involve the people who, those campaigns are aimed at improving their circumstances. Our campaigns always, involve some form of mass action. I would say almost always involve some form of mass action. And when I mean mass action, I mean bringing people together, whether that's through a picket, a march, or a meeting with government. We engage the media, so we use traditional ways of engaging with the media, so whether that's writing opinion pieces, whether that's releasing press statements, or doing interviews on television. We also use social media. And there's the other aspect that I would say is that our campaigns also, they're grounded in the law, they're grounded in the the constitutional right to a basic education in South Africa, and we use our democratic freedoms under the constitution to organize and to picket and to march and to express ourselves freely. But primarily we seek to achieve our campaign victories through organizing and through political means, and not primarily through court cases. But we do use litigation strategically, and Dmitri will talk to you about the Equal Education Law Center, which is a separate organization which we work very closely with, and which provides us with the kind of legal support that we need to campaign effectively.
That's great. Thank you, Brad. So Dmitri, you want to pick up?
Sure. Thanks very much, firstly to Brad for a good tee off there, and also good morning to everybody. It feels like quite a privilege. I need to speak up. It feels like quite a privilege to be here at what I think is an important event, and the context within which we're talking is also something which I think is to be inspiring for all of us. To say something also just about South Africa, which I think has relevance to the themes of the entire conference also. Brad was mentioning the history of South Africa and the role that the youth have played, in fact, in the struggle against apartheid. I think it's also quite relevant that we're about to celebrate, in fact, we're celebrating 20 years of democracy in South Africa, and in fact, are also celebrating June 16, which is Youth Day, which also has very, very particular and significant role in the struggle against apartheid. And that again is something which I think is important to the basis of equal education. Equal education itself is a youth movement which is bringing about massive change through young people, and in a way drawing on some of the not so distant history of apartheid, and in fact challenging the quite stark and still visible legacies of apartheid, which Brad has described, some of which we see in the education system today. To speak about the Law Center, the Equal Education Law Center is in some way also to speak about equal education. We come from, and we were started by this mass-based movement. In fact, a number of years later, equal education had been around for about 4 years before we'd actually, I guess, even thought about the need for us to establish a sister organization, and I'll come back to in a moment the principles upon which we base and understand the role of the law and courts and litigation in the broader struggle for education. But before I get there, perhaps to just say something, to say what Brad's been describing in terms of the goals and objectives of equal education in just a slightly different way. And that's to bring us to the question of what the role of the law in litigation actually is. Brad's described the way in which equal education is based on membership, and that's particularly organizing high school students, parents, and ultimately those that bear the brunt of the worst aspects of this kind of two-sided public education system. When we look at the kinds of issues that equal education is trying to take on, I would say that from a legal perspective, we're starting to understand the way in which we understand it is that the movement aims to ultimately hold the government accountable to address the challenges which were created in the past, but which still linger very strongly in the education system today. Brad was describing Bantu education as being specifically geared towards as a tool of oppression under apartheid. Apartheid in itself was in fact not only a system of racial discrimination, but it was one which was founded on a legal system which backed that up. We're sitting in a very different situation in South Africa today, where it's almost, we've gone 180 degrees in the sense that if you look at the South African Constitution, we are world renowned for the very progressive nature of the South African Constitution and our Bill of Rights. And in fact, one of the most powerful rights in that Constitution is the right to basic education, which interestingly enough, our courts have described as being an immediately realizable right. Now, that creates both advantages and challenges at the same time. You've got an immediately realizable right, but Brad was just saying that only 7% of schools in the country, about 25,000 public schools, actually have a stocked library. Now, how do you enforce an immediately realizable right against a context like that, which is in some way so far from the reality which learners are actually experiencing on a day-to-day basis? In any case, it's on that basis that equal education is then organizing. We're saying that we're now in 20 years into democracy. We're no longer fighting a state which is purposefully trying to oppress learners. It is presumably on the same side as equal education and civil society. And yet there is still a struggle that is having to be fought in holding the state accountable in itself, fulfilling those the obligations created by the Constitution, ultimately to make sure that everybody is provided with an adequate and substantively equal education. In other words, I'm saying that the struggle is different, but in many ways we're fighting some of the same battles that existed more than 20 years ago. Where it is that the Law Center and the Law Center comes in relation to this was in essence a realization on our part, and you heard in my in the introduction that I was actually working at Equal Education before the Law Center was started. We'd begun building quite big at Equal Education, big national campaigns. As Brad was saying, the most significant one that's been run recently is around school infrastructure and trying to force the government. The aims of that campaign was actually to force the government to adopt a set of laws that would say no matter where you are in the country, no matter what school you're at, these are the basic elements of infrastructure that should exist at any school. We're talking about things like electricity, water, sanitation, proper school classrooms, for example, libraries, science laboratories, and computer centers. These were all things which were actually had been the power to create that law had already in fact been given to the Minister of Education, which Equal Education came along and said, look, this is an important way to address the infrastructure backlogs. For example, if we don't have this as a law, it can be another 30 years before we can expect to see the government actually complying with standards against which they cannot be held accountable. And so one of the things that Equal Education was saying was that in order for us to hold the state accountable, we need to actually ensure that the minister adopts those laws. We can perhaps in the question and answer speak a little bit more about the campaign, but ultimately it got to the point at which after a number of years of back and forth engagement, including, for example, Equal Education organizing a march to Parliament in 2012 was the last one, 2011, of 20,000 high school learners who came out on Human Rights Day to demand that the Minister of Education does something quite simple, which was to follow through with the promise she'd made to adopt those actual laws. That engagement found that the minister made these promises, would keep missing the deadline, and eventually turned around and said, actually, you know what, I don't need to pass this law at all. We don't need binding binding regulations. We'll just have guidelines which the state can, in essence, change willy-nilly. At that point in time, Equal Education decided it was then time to go to court. And I think it was at that moment also that we began to realize the importance of using the law and having lawyers on standby, constantly engaging with the building of a big campaign and movement like that in the future campaigns that we take on. And it was, I think, the last kind of push for us in deciding to eventually start a law center dedicated specifically to education, which also provides a space for young lawyers to become experts in that field, but to be working very closely hand in hand with the more political social movement, as Brad was saying, that would prefer still to win the struggles and battles on the streets rather than in the courts. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Dmitri. So, I mean, there's clearly a number of themes that we're going to wind up coming back to. I think in particular the relationship between mass action and litigation, legal work. But it's always imposing, I think, to hear about the work that's happening in South Africa, where folks can talk about a march of 20,000 high school students to the capital. So recognizing that the process of building movement takes time and progression, will transition to the United States, where there is some very exciting and vibrant work happening in different corners of the country. So, Sophia, maybe you can describe a little bit about the work that's happening with United We Dream.
For sure. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Good? Okay, I know it's early. So I flew from California to be here, so I'm really, really excited. I'm really grateful to CCR. I'm really grateful to y'all for being here, because we need radical lawyers. like really, really badly in our movement. For us, I'm undocumented, right? I was born in Peru. I came when I was 6 years old. I learned I was undocumented when I was 17. My counselor told me I wasn't able to go on to higher education. I should just settle for community college, which actually is better than telling me I couldn't go on to higher education at all, right? Which most of us have been told that. And so it was because of my parents that I actually went on to UCLA, but I had many struggles, obviously, in that I couldn't drive, so I had to take the bus 2 hours each way. I had to go through the whole mental and emotional struggle, right, of understanding that I couldn't ever go back to Peru, at least not in the near future, to see my family there, my grandmas before they passed away. I had a whole bunch of just things that I was going through at 17 years old. And on top of that, right, the government, the country, the world was telling me that I was less than, right? I was worth less than my peers, than other human beings. So just going through that was really difficult. There's over 2 million undocumented youth in this country, over 12 million undocumented people in this country, right? And so I come from an organizing background that resulted from a rebellion of sorts. United We Dream is a national network, as was mentioned, and it was formed at the end of 2008 because we were kind of rebelling against the older generation of immigrant rights organizers who basically told us that we'd have a spot at the decision-making table, at the strategy-making table, right? Because we were too young, we were too inexperienced, we didn't really know what we were talking about, even though we were living that experience of being undocumented ourselves. So immigrant rights organizing is not new, right? It's been happening for many, many decades now. But having undocumented people risk not only arrest, but deportation, and like we did in 2010, is very new, right? That's only, 4 years old now. And it was undocumented youth that proved that we could do that. But it was our communities together that proved that we could defend each other. Honestly, at a time and like a moment where even attorneys, immigration lawyers, right, were proving otherwise, were showing otherwise. Like, no, you should follow the rules. As Bill was mentioning, I love that. He was so on point. I don't know if y'all got that. But he was really on point that it's not about rule focusing, it's about people focusing, right? And organizers, undocumented youth, I think really proved that in 2010 when we risked arrest and deportation, risked our lives to prove that these laws are unjust and they deserve to be broken and they deserve to be changed, right? So United We Dream was formed in 2009. We were heavily involved in the push for the Federal Dream Act. The Federal Dream Act, who has heard of the Federal Dream Act? Raise your hand. Awesome. So maybe you know that it was first introduced in 2001. 2010, we had the biggest push for it. People doing all kinds of civil disobedience, mock graduations, marches, rallies, call-ins, constantly. And still, by 5 Senate votes, it did not pass, right? So a whole decade, it still has not passed. And it's a very, very limited, restrictive piece of legislation, if y'all know the bill. So that's also, again, adding to the moment that we have been in, right? It was not successful in terms of passing the legislation, but it was very successful in terms of building a community, building a family, building a movement, right? A movement moment. So following the Federal Dream Act loss, we cried a lot. I remember marching in LA in the rain. It was so like epic and just like from a movie. But we were crying in the rain and marching. We didn't have a permit, but we were needing to do that, right? Needing to honor that loss and honor that struggle and that fight. But right after that moment, we picked right back up again and started the Right to Dream campaign. So fighting for administrative relief. Who has heard of deferred action? Great. So deferred action is something that came out of this Right to Dream campaign, again, led by undocumented youth, but with the help of radical attorneys. So a little bit of what happened there, just real quick, we were fighting to stop deportations on some kind of level, right? So we had been fighting to push the Federal Dream Act, but our brothers and sisters ourselves were being deported right and left every day, right? And we had been successful in stopping some deportations on a case-by-case basis. Again, kind of proving a lot of immigration attorneys wrong, and then soliciting their help afterwards, showing them that we could stop deportations. But it was really tiring. Obviously, it's really draining to stop deportations on a case-by-case basis. So we pushed for the Right to Dream campaign, the right to be with our loved ones, the right to move freely, the right to have these basic rights. That was the messaging, and the actual ask, though, was to stop deportations and to have the right to work also, so to have a work permit. And we were shifting the focus from Congress, which we focused on in 2010 through the Federal Dream Act, we shifted it to the administration, right? And I want to kind of point out how I think oftentimes our identities at the margins, right, our livelihoods at the margins force us to think more creatively, force us to think outside of the box. And that's exactly what happened with deferred action. We had amazing organizers, amazing minds, amazing undocumented youth that studied the law, that read the books, weren't necessarily attorneys themselves, but knew very much about the law given our experience in our lives. And again, we shifted the focus to the administration. We were targeting President Obama, who unfortunately has the worst deportation record in the history of mankind, and has reached over 2 million deportations. And we said, hey, you can stop deportations, right? So do it. The White House came back and said, no, we can't. And so we came back with a letter with 100 immigration law professors, law attorneys, and all of them signed a letter saying that, yes, you can. So our new narrative was President Obama, yes, you can, which is like kind of a twist on his, as y'all know, his presidential slogan. And there was a lot more to it, a lot more organizing, a lot more leverage. Rubio from Florida, for example, was involved in like trying to push for a DREAM Act Light, and we used that as leverage, telling the White House and the Democratic Party, like, hey, we're gonna be in conversations with the Republicans because, I mean, first and foremost, we care about our communities and our safety, right? It doesn't matter which party hat you wear. And so using that as leverage, using that as momentum, finally President Obama and the administration on June 15th announced deferred action, right? And just lastly, to close up, because I know we don't have a lot of time, I'm gonna show y'all a video of just where the current moment is. I love, again, that Bill emphasized to go to where the fire is, right? I think it's not just to go to where the fire is, but to help fuel that fire also. But we're fighting to stop deportations for all of our communities, right? And have you all heard of the Not One More campaign? Some? Awesome. So not one more deportation, not one more families separated. But it's also something that I think applies to many issues and many struggles, right? Not one more LGBT person harassed, not one more woman that has to feel like they're an object walking down the street. So for me, it means a lot of things, but it definitely started out of the Not One More deportation campaign. And so this is Operation Butterfly, which United We Dream had a few years ago now, and this happened at the border in Arizona. And these are 3 of my brothers and sisters who were able to reunite with their mothers, and I want y'all to share this video.
So right now we're at a hotel near the border. We're in Nogales, Arizona, and we're actually, and our mothers are in Nogales, Mexico, on the other side of the border, and we're just getting ready to go see them for the first time in a long time.
You're excited for that? So it hasn't really kicked in yet, and then what they say here will probably kick in.
Deported, and hasn't come back. I haven't seen her since then, so it's been over 6 years.
She always asks me, what do you do? What do you do? Why are you always going to DC, or why are you always in this thing? Like, and she's always scared. Like, don't worry, Mom, there's a lot of them.
But I'm also a little angry that this is the only way that I can see her and be affected.
So I know the sound wasn't really great, but if you could watch the video on YouTube and share it with your friends, it's called Operation Butterfly. This is Arizona, right? This is our border. These are our people. These are our families. And that's what we're fighting for right now, is to stop deportations and keep our families together. I started this by saying that we need you, but we really need each other at this point, we're at a huge moment of crisis, and I need us to understand that and really wake up and help other people wake up, because otherwise we're going to pay the price, and we already are. So thank you.
So thank you, Sophia. I think the video can be sort of a helpful reminder of the humanity that's in so much of our struggles. Like, it can get easy to get caught up in sort of policy fights and litigation fights, but so much of what it is that folks are struggling around is the capacity to be able to relate to one another as full human beings. And I think another theme that sort of grows out of the talk that Bill gave this morning is the challenge for us as radical activists in whatever venue we find ourselves to pull hope from incredibly tragic situations. And I think, there may not be a better example of an organization doing that than the work of the Dream Defenders. So, Ahmad, can you talk a little bit about the context that you all found yourselves in and the work that you all have been doing?
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for being here today. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here, extremely humbled. I actually want to share before I get started that I'm so inspired by the fellow panelists that we have here today. As was mentioned earlier, I'm from East Jerusalem, Palestine, and so South Africa, that struggle to end apartheid and that continued struggle to seek justice in South Africa will always have a special place in my heart. And Sophia, I had been a big fan of her work for a while as well, and we actually just shared that we have some commonalities in our struggle. She will be going to Peru for the first time since she had to leave as a youth, coming up soon, and we talked about how I still can't go back to Jerusalem at the moment, and so I think we talked about that intersectionality just a few moments ago, and it's beautiful. So the Dream Defenders, we feel like we're at ground zero for the struggle for justice in the South, in the United States of America. The state of Florida has been a hotbed of issues for people of color and low-income communities. We were founded in the wake of the Trayvon Martin tragedy, the murder of Trayvon Martin. We decided that something had to be done, and so I was actually in Amsterdam. I had recently passed the bar, and I'm sure you all can relate with this. We don't. When I was a law student, I didn't have it all figured out. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know how I could be the most impactful attorney that I wanted to be and needed to be for my people and my struggle and my community. And so I was really just thinking it through when Trayvon Martin was murdered. Philip Agnew, myself, Gabriel Pendis, and some of the several co-founders of Dream Defenders organized a conference call thinking that something had to be done. And so we got on this call, and we were astounded really to find out that 150 people had joined us on this conference call. We did Facebook invites and emails and text messages and things like that. And on the call we had 150 people, and we started thinking, looking at the past, looking at the civil rights movement, where we've been, where we've come from, how can we utilize that really in shaping where we want to go in the future. And so someone brought up the idea of the historic march from Selma to Montgomery in the civil rights movement, which was 40 miles. And so, we decided maybe that's something we should look into. And we had to iron out some details, obviously, because once we suggested that, one of the people on the call said, okay, 3 or 4 hours, we'll march for 3 or 4 hours and it'll be fine. And we had to obviously let that person know that 40 miles, if you're going to do it on foot, would take a little more than 3 or 4 hours. So, and then on that call, interestingly enough, is where we came up with the name The Dream Defenders. There's actually, God bless this woman. We have no idea who she was to this day. She's kind of like the fairy godmother of the Dream Defenders. She was just one of the 150 souls who was on the call and said, she said, you know what, you all are defending Dr. King's dream. You are defending our dream. You should call yourselves the Dream Defenders. And so it wasn't any creative genius by myself or Philip or Gabe or any of the founders. There was just one brave soul who just had some creativity at that moment and was inspired to give us that label. And so we went on, we decided we'll do this 40-mile march from Daytona Beach to Sanford, Florida. Sanford was the small town in which Trayvon Martin was gunned down. To this point, there had been 4.5 weeks had passed, and George Zimmerman had not even been arrested. And so we were yearning for justice. Many people are so eager to get the conviction, and we were just simply looking for an arrest. We were looking for someone in a capacity of authority to say what happened to this young man was wrong. So we decided to march 40 miles from Daytona Beach to Sanford. We had some of the best bonding experiences I've experienced during my entire life. People from all walks of life, college students, alumni, different religious backgrounds, racial backgrounds, really committed to this idea, this thought of the beloved community. And so we had some struggles along the way. We, we're obviously tired. We slept on church pews and church floors. We bathed in churches. We had obscenities yelled at us along the way by passersby that did not agree with our message. We had been named every slur under the sun. And so that really just inspired us to keep going. When we got to Sanford, we saw the police department and we saw that structure as really, part of the problem. I think, police officers are supposed to serve and protect, or protect and serve. I'm not sure how that goes. But we saw that structure as a part of the injustice that was going on in Sanford. And so 6 of our members decided to conduct an act of civil disobedience and block the doors of the Sanford Police Department, because we were letting them know that until George Zimmerman was arrested, or until we were let in on a plan of George Zimmerman being arrested, that business would not continue as normal. And so the Sanford Police Department, instead of arresting 6 college students from the state of Florida, decided to shut down work for the day. So that told you how much they cared about doing their jobs. After a few hours of realizing we weren't going anywhere, they decided to call us into a back room and engage in a meeting, at which point the state attorney, Angela Corey, who had been given authority by Governor Rick Scott at the moment, let us know that George Zimmerman would be arrested. And so after negotiating a couple of other points that we felt the community needed to be in on, we decided to end the occupation of the Sanford Police Department. And we decided at that moment that we had developed some power for the youth of the state of Florida, youth of color, low-income youth, and we did no longer want to be the reactionary group that so many times we are. We decided that we needed a consistent fight and a consistent body, and so the Dream Defenders was born as an organization after that action, not just a march, not just a civil disobedience, but a lively movement that was going to flourish and continue to grow. And so after that, over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been developing leaders across the state of Florida. We've been holding trainings, workshops, and really expanding across the university system in the state of Florida. We have chapters across the state, and we're looking to develop into the communities and the middle school and high school level as well. Most recently, we had a 31-day occupation of Governor Rick Scott's office. Governor Rick Scott has been, again, one of those structures that seems to be the antithesis, the exact opposite of what we'd like to accomplish moving forward in the state of Florida and across the South and the country. And so we occupied that state capitol for 31 days, demanding a review of stand your ground laws, which have led to the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, and several others, as well as the school to prison pipeline, which continues via zero tolerance policies to criminalize and incarcerate many of our youth. And really, I think our goal is to fight the dehumanization overall of people of color, of low-income people. The criminalization and dehumanization of these people is what we're united for. We're ready, we're coming, and we'll be here in the fight involved, and we love working with like-minded people like Sophia and others, so just extremely excited to be here with you all.
Thank you, Ahmad. So I've got a few questions that I'd like to throw out to all of y'all. And I think the first is just like, what is it about young people? So Sophia, you talked a little bit about the need for United We Dream to challenge some of the older generation of activists. And it brought to mind, in some ways, the initial motive behind the founding of SNCC, which was started as, Ella Baker played a critical role in helping to start SNCC to create a space for young people to be able to take more direct action, more militant direct action, and in some ways challenge the older leadership of the civil rights movement. And Dmitri, you talked about National Youth Day in South Africa, where the students in Soweto wound up going on strike and really wound up sparking an expansion of the movement against apartheid. And it seems like in various countries at different points in time, youth wind up playing this really catalytic role in spearheading the development of a more powerful movement. So I'd like to just sort of explore that with y'all. Like, what is it about young people?
We're all looking. Oh.
You started.
Sure. Well, I'm 24 right now. In the spectrum of things, I feel really old, actually. My mom keeps telling me I'm not. But like I said, I started when I was 17. And I am ready to, this is my last year on United We Dream. Being on the board is really different than like doing on the ground organizing, obviously, right? It's a whole nother development that I've been able to have the privilege of having. But I'm ready to like pass on the baton, and I think that continuity, that leadership development, intentional leadership development and leadership transitioning is what was not happening, at least in the immigration bubble. And that was hurting our success as a movement overall. And so we were sick and tired of it by 2000 and at the end of 2008. I mean, literally, it was like really ridiculous. We were at a conference. I wasn't there, but this is how it started. We were at a conference. I was there in spirit. And the folks gave us a closet room to meet in because we requested a room to meet and like talk about legislation and talk about how we're going to move forward. And they gave us a closet room where all the suitcases were at, where all the coats were at. And then people were like, okay, we're done, and we're going to create United We Dream. And they started getting on conference calls and just push through. So that's how like bad it was. And it continues to be that way, to be honest. I mean, it was really disappointing when SCIU came out and said, and other organizations came out and said, President Obama, you can take your time until the end of the summer to stop deportations or to take any administrative action. And Eliseo Medina is one of those people that has not passed on the baton, unfortunately, and I would love to have a conversation with him. But it's really unfortunate when people just hang on to an illusion of power, right, and to the access of power that they think they have. When you're not sharing that, when you're not expanding it, then you're not really building power, right? And so for me, I'm really invested in that youth leadership and youth development. Obviously, youth, we don't pretend to have all the answers, and I think that also requires a level of maturity and experience, right, to acknowledge that. But once we do acknowledge that, then I think we just are ripe for making mistakes together, for taking risks together, right, for taking those leaps together, which I think is required to not just succeed at getting legislation or making change, but also sustaining that change, right, which is really key. Implementing DACA was really hard, but we played a key role in doing that with attorneys. Also sharing the narrative of how we won DACA, right? If we don't tell the right story, if we let the real story be covered up, which oftentimes happens, right, then that's going to take away from the power that we are building. So those are just some reflections.
I mean, I'm speaking in quite general terms, but I think that across the world, I think young people are generally more idealistic and hopeful than older people. And I think that young people are also more willing to take risks. I think that once you get older and you start having children and you start having a mortgage to worry about, I think that can take the wind out of your sails. And so young people, also feel injustice really strongly, and have got that energy and that vitality. And that will to make things better. And I think also what I'd say though is that young people can't change the world by themselves. Young people can often point the way, but we've seen in South Africa in the mid 1980s in South Africa, when the resistance to apartheid was really at its height, young people were the catalyst in many instances. But what the young activists did at that point was that they always tried to reach out to the workers, and they always tried to reach out to parents, they always tried to reach out to communities. And so I think that that's something very important that we have to remember about ourselves, because sometimes we can feel like we're going to change the world by ourselves. So we need to think about how we can bring people together and bring people forward and change things up and lead the way.
Just a couple of words I wanted to add. I think as we grow older, and I still consider myself a part of the youth, and I'm 29, I'll be 30 in a few months, so don't Don't give me a hard time about that. But I think as we get older, we're taught to dream less, and I think for the youth, it's really about holding on to that dream. Being idealistic and altruistic, I think, are things that many of us leave alone as we grow through our progressions and get that mortgage and family going. But I just think that that's why we need the youth, because sometimes they inspire us to dream where we've kind of forgot what the dream was. And so the youth will always be that spark, and then we have to be there to support them. And I myself, as part of the youth for the next couple of years, will be there to support them, and then also beyond that, because we need them to remind us how to dream.
I think everyone's pretty much covered it. The only thing I would add is a question of, or an issue about creativity. I think one of the things that's made Equal Education's ability to capture the imagination of the public around an issue which tends to be quite obvious. No one is going to argue that fighting to improve education is important. But to be able to sustain campaigns in the way in which Equal Education has been able to do, in fact, against a kind of complicit reaction from the state, has been through constantly asking for the same thing, but finding very creative and energetic ways to do that. And I think that's been one of the ways, it's been one of the major strengths of Equal Education. In fact, I must, before we forget, is to say that we've brought some annual reports and things which would just give you a little bit more of an idea of the work that we do both at Equal Education and at the Law Center. But one thing that really stands out for me was a time at which Equal Education was actually holding a picket, in fact, what we call a sleep-in outside Parliament. And it was one of the many things that Equal Education had done to try and get some kind of response from the Minister of Education when she wasn't giving these laws that she'd initially promised to make. And there was an interesting standoff that happened between the Equal Education membership, the high school learners that were there, and the police. So in essence, what Equal Education had planned to do was to be outside Parliament for three days. And in fact, what we then did was we'd sleep there every night, pitch tents outside Parliament, and we're watching movies across from the front of Parliament. We had a kind of drive-in style movie, and watching documentaries about other struggles. In fact, I think we're watching stuff about the Treatment Action Campaign and a documentary on the struggle for antiretrovirals. A very creative way to get attention. So every morning when you wake up and the politicians would come, there would be the kids outside Parliament. The police had, in terms of the regulations for demonstrations in South Africa, the municipality and police actually have to give you a permit to hold some kind of demonstration. Parliament also has probably more stringent regulations around how they would give permits or not, because it's Parliament and not just the street anywhere. So they'd given us permission to be there for 2 nights and said, no, but you can't be there for the 3rd night, which was quite arbitrary in itself. But Equal Education had said, look, the membership had said, we want to be there for 3 nights. We want the parliamentarians to come out and hear us, and so we're going to stay there. And I'll never forget quite a powerful moment at which the police came and they said, okay, look, whatever you're doing now, this 3rd day, you're going to have to move, okay? Otherwise, and they didn't know exactly what to say. What were the police going to do when school kids were there? In fact, I think they were in their uniforms on that day. And the police said, look, and I remember a white Afrikaans policeman having to come to black kids there ultimately because they wanted to improve their education, and say to them, look, if you don't move now, and he said something like, we're going to have to take this to the next level. And immediately the media came, and there was this kind of tense moment at which there was a confrontation, and quite simply a high school student, on behalf of all the rest of the Equal Education members that were there, that sat down peacefully and said, we're not going to move until we get some kind of response. And the police eventually backed down. And for me, one of the most powerful things was the power that even that policeman had to feel in looking at a young person and saying, there's nothing I can do. I can, in fact, only agree with you. And I think that there's, in that sense, there's also, in relation to society, young people hold the aspirations of the future of society. And if there's ways in which you can kind of get people to recognize that, it can be quite a powerful mobilizing tool, and something which I think can give a different angle to the way in which we think about quite obvious problems and issues.
That's great, thanks. So again, another question for everybody, and Brad, you sort of kicked this off in talking about the relationship between mass action and litigation, legal work. And in some important ways, I think, again, Bill this morning was talking about the importance of rooting out the problems from the root, rather than sort of making piecemeal, systemic, or sort of symptomatic change in a way that sort of requires mass action. But sometimes that's at a tension in terms of the role of the law and litigation and policy. So what do you all see as the effective role of lawyers, legal practitioners, what have you, in supporting the development of radical mass action?
I guess I'll start. I just think that as an attorney, you're given a great amount of responsibility and power in some respects, and it's our duty to give that back to the people. And so a lot of times Dream Defenders is exploring different civil disobedience or actions that obviously may be against the law, and I think that's when I maybe step outside of the room, allow them to, fully plan and detail everything that they want to do. And then they just tell me where I need to be and when I need to be there to support them. I think that I would, go back to what Professor Quigley was saying, in that, we need to listen a lot and learn, because I truly felt like, I've gained a lot more over these past 2 years than I've given. But I think that people need to know that they have someone on their side that understands the law, someone that can support them in letting them know that the law is supposed to defend them and the law is supposed to protect them in this country. And so I think that, that is a bit in general terms, but that's where I view my role as, really essentially just being as supportive as possible to those on the ground that are really going to fight for change. And then if need be and there's litigation involved or there are arrests made, then we'll be there to defend them and support them as well.
And I think to show that the law can be there, not the law, the people who enforce the law, who are supposed to enforce the law, right, can be there to protect you. Because I think the narrative is that the law is supposed to protect and serve, or police are supposed to protect and serve, lawyers, etc. But then in practice, it doesn't happen that way. How many immigration attorneys have screwed over so many immigrants, like me and my family, right? Just screwed us over for our money, for like everything that we have, and still like we get deported on top of that, right? So just acknowledging like the trauma that our communities hold and the real violence that we experience every single day, I think is really key. And the power dynamic that exists between attorneys and us, right? When I was 17 or when I was growing still, when I didn't understand that there are unjust laws out there that should be changed, I saw attorneys as holding the answers. My parents had that also, right? Had that narrative, and that they passed that on to me very just apparently. So there is a power dynamic between attorneys, and acknowledging that power, it's like comes with great responsibility, like Peter Parker, right? Spider-Man. Acknowledging that very, very realistically and owning that, and then breaking that, I think is really key, right? Not to break it so that the power dynamic shifts and you're at the bottom and the community's at the top. No, but it's like equal partners in trying to create a more just world. Like that's what we should all be working towards together, right? So I think that's one thing that needs to be really intentional on both sides. And I think you as attorneys hold an immense amount of knowledge and power in helping the other side understand that, and proving that, I think, through your actions, not just your words. And then the other thing is just helping us find ways to go around the unjust laws, to break unjust laws. If you can't be in the room, cool. If you can be in the room, like let's work together on this, and put our minds together, right? Because we're stronger together. So that's one of the amazing things that I think we were able to help a lot of attorneys that started working with us in stopping deportations and pushing for deferred action and giving them the idea of signing a letter, right, and putting their names behind this to prove to the White House that they could in fact pass some kind of deferred action. So all of those things were things that organizers helped these attorneys understand, and now we have a lot more radical attorneys that we're working with, right, and radical attorneys that understand how to make concrete change, and we help each other in that way. We help each other grow. So I think those things are key, because if we hadn't chosen to break these unjust laws, if we hadn't chosen to not listen to the attorneys that were giving us advice, then we wouldn't be stopping deportations. We wouldn't have these mass campaigns happening right now, and we wouldn't be building a movement, which we need. So those are at least two things that I think you all can have a really effective role in shifting. And just acknowledging like there's a whole bunch of structural injustice and like systemic narrative to how we've ended up with these narratives, right? These power dynamics and these unjust laws, etc. So it can be really overwhelming, I think, for all of us. But that human connection, like that human relationship, this one-on-one is really, really key, and can sustain you a long way and can give you a lot of hope and inspiration. So the more people that you touch and the more people that touch you, I think the more powerful that you will also be as attorneys.
I think that, you know, sometimes an issue which can seem like an individual issue actually is a part of a larger systemic problem. And so, for example, you can have a situation in a school where there's a high school principal that is practicing corporal punishment, okay, that is beating up students. Now, you can get a lawyer involved and you can take legal action against that particular principal, okay? But I can guarantee you, though, that it's not only corporal punishment that's a problem in that school. There's lots of problems in that school. And the root cause of those problems is a lack of accountability within those schools, a lack of accountability from teachers and the principal to the students at that school, and the lack of power which the students have in asserting their rights. And so I think that in some instances, you know, in involving legal action, particularly quite early on with an issue, can actually, you know, perpetuate the powerlessness which people have, and actually can do more harm. And so that's why, you know, I think that it's very important to think about how the law and how lawyers can actually help to empower people to act. So how can the law and how can lawyers help those students to know their rights and to know how they can assert their rights? And I think that that's a very important role which lawyers can play, because at the end of the day, it's also not even practical that, you know, you're going to have lawyers running around looking for problems, you know, in all the schools in South Africa, individual problems every time. That's not even practical, you know. So we need to get to a point where our people are empowered in their schools and empowered in their communities to actually be able to know the law and to assert their rights, and to do that through coming together, you know, behind particular issues and campaigns.
I mean, I'll just add two brief points. One is actually an extension of what Brad is saying, and I think, you know, it's an important principle which is easier said than actually done, I think, in some instances, which is the importance of lawyers also not seeing their role as separate from the social movements. You know, in order to be able to actually understand where there is a proper overlap between what it is that you can win in court, for example, and what it is that the social movement is actually seeking to address. Because there actually are instances where those things may be at odds. And lawyers, I think, if they aren't properly immersed in the struggle, in a sense, can sometimes overlook that aspect. We've been going through a couple of examples, just specifically around education litigation over the last couple of days, where there's been a court case that's been won and specific relief secured on paper through a judgment. But because there's no proper, there hasn't been a proper social movement that's built, campaigning, that's been ready to kind of take on the role of making sure that there's implementation of that court order. In some instances, it's had quite the unintended consequences of having a backlash And I can think of countless examples in South Africa where we sit as litigators and say, look, I mean, this looks like a slam dunk case that we could take to court. But is it something that would be supported by equal education? Is it something that we would be able to actually ensure that there's the political pressure to be able to ensure implementation? Is something that we have to be quite conscious of. And then something else which I think is also a related point is lawyers. This probably doesn't apply to most people here, but lawyers tend to have very big egos, and the moment that that can be something that blinds the understanding of what your role as a lawyer actually is. For example, sometimes there's the need to actually be able to take on a case with a massive risk of losing it. But still knowing that it could have a different effect. We've had a recent example of that where we went to court to try and force the hand of the state where they were failing to. We were dealing with a gang violence situation at a particular township area in the Western Cape. And basically the education department said, I mean, it had been 3 weeks that literally there were bullets coming through the classroom windows, and the Department of Education said, look, it's not our responsibility. We're there to make sure that teaching happens. In fact, when the teachers then marched to the education department office to say we're not going to go to school, but we're reporting for duty at the education department, because the education department actually had the nerve to say that we will dock your pay if you're not at school, despite the fact that there was major gang violence going on. We went to court on a bit of on shaky grounds, and were able to very quickly get an urgent interdict without the other parties actually being present. It was an ex parte application, and we turned it around very quickly, got an interim order, which we at that point kind of knew it was possible that it would be overturned later in the week. It was eventually overturned. Technically we lost the case, but it forced, between the Friday afternoon that we actually got the court order and Monday when the school was going to reopen, it forced the education department, social services, to actually have a meeting, develop a full plan, and give us what we were asking for in the order. I must go report to my board of trustees that we lost the case, but at the end of the day, it has achieved the objective that we actually wanted, which would be very different if you're coming at it from a litigation only perspective without actually kind of marrying your objectives with what it is that the bigger movement and struggle would actually require.
That's great. Thank you. So I want to open it up now for questions and comment. It seems to me that in that last response, one of the things that sort of threads everybody's answer is that in the notion of radical lawyering, that our responsibility is to first think of ourselves as radicals, as activists, and that there's a particular tool set that we bring to that particular task, but that we're sort of activists or radicals before we're lawyers. So I want to open it up for questions.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. This was very beautifully facilitated. All of you shared a lot of tremendous insight, and it's honestly very rare to see a space like this in which you have our comrades here from South Africa in conversation with youth of color here from within the US. So I'm just very grateful to be in this space. I want to go back to what all of you have touched on, which is this tension between external folks, whether it's lawyers, whether it's movement elders, and I'm really glad that all of you have addressed that tension with honesty, because it's often one that's difficult to bring up. As youth, as young people, we often face a lot of really ugly power dynamics that strip us of our agency and our voice. But I'm also curious, in terms of the dynamics that you have seen within your respective organizations and movements, how have you addressed internal tensions for the youth that are part of your communities but may not necessarily be there? So for Ahmad and for Sophia, how do you bring in undocumented youth that, higher education is not even on their radar because of the conditions that they're facing in this country? For Brad and for Dmitri, how are you incorporating this staggering 20% of youth in South Africa that are dropping out of school into your campaigns for the right to education?
50%.
50%, I'm sorry.
That's even more staggering.
All right. Well, I'm keep being honest. And I mean, that's another, just going back to the first question, I think as youth, we don't carry as much baggage as older folks. And like I said, I don't pretend to have all the answers, so I'm going to own, like, the tensions and the mistakes that are going to continue to happen. Because that's how we grow. That's how we learn. United We Dream. So going back even further than 2008, 2009, our immigrant youth movement started as a college-based movement. I come from Ideas at UCLA, which was started back in 2003. Most of the immigrant youth, 26% of immigrant youth are in California, right? So it also matters regionally. So we do have that origin. In terms of addressing the issue of undocumented youth that don't make it to higher education, we do have a lot of undocumented youth that don't make it to higher education and are part of United We Dream, because there are also states where we are banned from going to college, right? So it's not even an option. Georgia has banned undocumented youth. They're currently fighting to change that. Alabama has done the same. And then beyond that, there's only about 15 states that have in-state tuition laws, only about 3 or 4. I think that's increased to like maybe 5 now, that have state financial aid. So there's huge barriers, right, to accessing higher education, and even more so to graduating from college. So I think a lot of our youth are in and out of college. A lot of our youth leaders and members are in and out, trying to get to college, most of them. Definitely, I think value education. Education equity is a huge, huge priority and like value and objective for us. That's where we come from, and that's where we're trying to go. But I will own that most of our youth are probably not those who don't see education as a pathway for them, right? And so that's a huge community, given that we're part of the undocumented, the community that's been in the shadows, that's often told to not pursue higher education and pursue a job right after high school, or even if they make it out of high school in the first place. So we haven't done as much work on that as I would like, to be honest, because we've been fighting to like stop deportations and try to campaign to campaign to campaign. So I definitely identify with trying to stop being as reactionary as sometimes feels necessary. But there are groups that have been doing that work and are trying to do that work. So I know in California, in the Bay Area, there's 67 Sueños, 67 Dreams. So that focuses intentionally on youth that are not necessarily in the higher education path or track. That's the only group that I know of. I will say that part of it is us like outreaching to folks and being really intentional about that, but the other part is for those folks to like want to be engaged, right? And for those folks to want to be part of this movement that we have tried to make really visible. And we are also trying to shift the narrative very intentionally from this good immigrant, bad immigrant dichotomy that just does not help us at all, is destructive. So we're trying to be really intentional about completely obliterating that, acknowledging that we sometimes play a role in perpetuating that, unfortunately. Whether intentionally or not, right? But it's up to us to break that narrative also. So just like it's up to lawyers to break that narrative of like lawyers holding all the answers, right? We need to do that. So I'll leave it at that.
So I'll start with the first part about the internal tensions. That is something that we've dealt with extensively in our first couple of years in existence, and it's really just because, as Sophia alluded to, we do not have all the answers, and we are human beings attempting to get right what has been wrong for so long. And so we've had a lot of retreats. That's how we've dealt with them. We've had a lot of them. Can't even count them. And really, even within that, you can't just say, let's have a retreat, because you have to create that proper space where people feel comfortable. And sometimes that may mean someone like myself not saying a word and stepping back, because everyone has to recognize the privilege that they have, within their story. And so many times it's upon like Philip and myself to really just step back and not say a thing and really just listen. A lot of times we're learning from these frustrations that people are expressing to us, and they've allowed us to get better. So quite honestly, I think tensions can get uncomfortable, but I think in the long run you appreciate them and you appreciate what you learn from them. I think that I've grown immensely in the last year or two as has our organization, and I think we owe that to some of the tensions that people have brought up, and which they should bring up and we should continue to address. I think the second part of your question, as far as maybe getting people engaged when it's maybe not necessarily their path, we've always said that you have to meet people where they're at. because, you know, today I may know something that I did not know yesterday, and similarly tomorrow the same path will follow. And so we can't get in this habit. We have to get out of the habit of, you know, putting people in a box that they won't necessarily be confined to. And so we meet people where they're at. And I think what's helped us to allow for a lot of intersectionality is the art of storytelling. Is, I think, you know, really powerful. For myself, you know, I don't have the undocumented struggle, but when I listen to someone like Sophia express that, there are bits and pieces within that story that directly correlate to something I've experienced in my life. And so being able to tell your story in a real and genuine way, and people feeling that, is really the way we've broken down a lot of those barriers. But then again, realizing that you will meet people where they're at, so it may take a while to get them where they need to be, or where you want to be, or where we all need to be. So, yeah.
Do you want me to try and answer? I'll just try and answer very specifically the question that you asked about, you know, how do we try and incorporate the 50% of youth who are dropping out of school. Now, I mean, our focus, you know, our aim is really to stop that situation from happening, because it's happening all the time. It's a systemic problem, and we want to improve, you know, the quality of education, particularly in poor schools, so that there isn't this high dropout rate. And so that's where we put our focus on. And the membership base of the organization is still of school students. Okay. Now, I mean, in South Africa, there's a massive problem of unemployment. There's about 40% unemployment within the country, and about 70% of that is actually young people. You know, there's more than 3 million young people that are not in school, not in any form of tertiary education, and that are not working. And many of those young people will probably never have, you know, a job in their lives. I mean, that's the reality that we're facing, and that's what we're trying to organize and trying to, you know, to change at the school level. Now, we haven't, you know, set ourselves the task of trying to organize those youth. We haven't done that. We are, I mean, I'm not just saying this now, but we are looking at ways in which we can do that, or at least partner together with organizations that have got more of that kind of mandate, or more of that sort of membership base. But it's an important question. I just want to say one other thing is that what we're also trying to do is, you know, we're trying to build links, you know, with the 75% of students, with the 25% of students who went to and who go to privileged schools. You know, we're trying to build that cross, you know, class and racial solidarity as well. And so that's also, you know, a conscious effort of our work, because, you know, students who are in that 25% need to see the situation and the injustice of it as their problem too, you know. And so we're also building that solidarity. I'll leave it there.
Same thing with parents.
The same goes for parents, you know. So we actively organize parents. They've got their own parent branches, and they, you know, some of the stuff, it's for them to talk about their issues, but it's also mainly about, you know, what they can do to support their children at school, how they can get involved in their schools, how they can support their schools. So that's a constituency that we also, you know, are organizing. And as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to build that, you know, that we're trying to build strong communities, not only strong young people.
Thank you for that. So maybe what we'll do, we have about 10 minutes left, I think, before we've got to get back over to the big room. So maybe what we'll do is take both of these questions, let the panelists respond, and then we'll see where we are.
Hi, thank you guys for sharing your stories about organizations. They sound really amazing. And I think listening to your stories, I have a question. It's based on kind of an observation, in that one of the things that organizations, it's a question of sustainability, right? So how do organizations that receive grants from large foundations, such as the Ford Foundation or any type of wonderful large foundation that are often corporate sponsored, how does that change the dynamic within your organization, especially with regards to youth? Can you talk about the pluses and minuses about receiving funds, and how that might water down and reduce your ability to be effective with youth?
Hold on.
Yep.
Did you have a question?
I did, and actually it has a lot to do with funding, so I think that's a perfect question for that, but I did have a second question, so I'll press 1 or 2. I was wondering about the structure in terms of the organization. You mentioned talking about this tension between kind of going to the advocacy work and the actual lawyers. So the attorneys that you work with, are they primarily volunteers, or do they have their own practice? Are they actually attorneys in the organization? I was just wondering kind of the structure that you all have built in your respective organizations.
Great. And so then, in the activist spirit of the workshop, maybe we'll allow one person to break the rules, and we'll throw in one more question.
I just wanted to ask about, briefly alluded to the creativity of methods that you use to organize youth. And I'm a lawyer, but I'm sort of departed, and I work with youth now building your advocacy, your creative expression. And wanted to ask you about how you see the connections and the divide between things like arts advocacy that's purely for its own use, and for developing and building identity for own youth so that they can then engage in broader movements. And to the extent that you have used some of those methods, what's the value?
So the funding question, it was funny, you threw out Ford. I felt like you were looking at our files right now. That's really interesting. So we actually, we haven't dealt with any of the negative ramifications to this point. We actually have Ford Foundation as a funder. There's just, certain technicalities, C3, C4, whether funds can be tied to advocacy and certain issues or not. To this point, it hasn't handicapped us at all. Because we've been able to, kind of get funds from other arenas and shift them to certain pots that, maybe Ford Foundation wouldn't fund. And so we haven't seen any of those negative aspects of it yet. The second question was about the lawyers. I'm actually the only attorney currently with the Dream Defenders. Dream Defenders is my full-time job. And when I talked about the tensions earlier, it was more of the organizational tensions. It wasn't between the attorneys and the organization. So I guess that's one that I'll have to learn about in the future and get back to you all about. And one point on the creative aspect, we are heavy on that. We love allowing youth to express themselves and allowing that to be the catalyst for issue-based campaigns. So one of our recent campaigns was based around one of Kendrick Lamar's songs, or one of I don't know if it was on his album or a track, but Good Kids, Mad Cities. Because we just felt like so many of our youth are criminalized for minor things that we used to get either detention for or maybe just a stern looking to from the teacher, right? But now kids are going to jail for those things, and so we felt like Good Kids, Mad Cities, perfectly fit the story of these youth across the state of Florida and the country that are getting locked up for minor infractions. And so I think Dream Defenders has from the start felt like creativity, art, hip hop, cinema, documentaries, all that are essential to communicating with our generation and to communicating that message outward to everyone else. So I think I did my best to.
Good job. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, for me, the funny one is a big question because I'm on the board, so I deal with that a lot. So it can be really overwhelming to be in the nonprofit industrial complex, right, and to be a part of it. And so, y'all know about the nonprofit industrial complex, I'm assuming, so that's why you asked that question. It sucks, and we need to dismantle it somehow, but right now that's the moment we're in, and that's how we're able to build United We Dream. That's how we're able to sustain ourselves, and we do need to sustain ourselves, right? Like, I'm not going to ask our people to starve and do this work, right? I think there are alternative models that we are exploring, and definitely we're trying to shift really intentionally into grassroots fundraising, making sure that our communities know that being involved isn't just signing a petition, right? But it's also putting your money where your mouth is, putting your money where your actions are. And so I need to give money also. My parents should also be asked to give money. There's a lot of shame in that sometimes that I've had to acknowledge and our communities have had to acknowledge. Just coming from undocumented immigrant communities, whatever, we don't have a lot of money, so we don't feel good about asking our people for money, right? So we have to go through like fundraising trainings to kind of dismantle that even within ourselves and be like, no, we have just as much integrity and dignity, and we should be asking each other for money to sustain ourselves. So that's just part of it. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. In terms of what was the second question?
Organization structure.
Yes, so we have 2 board members that are attorneys. They're badass radical attorneys who work with our immigrant communities on a daily basis and understand the power of organizing, and it's been great to have them there. I think this just goes back to Bill's point earlier about building organizations and how you all do have a critical role in doing that and in assisting with that. And I think that's very true. We don't have attorneys on staff. Nope. We have legal directors and like policy directors, which is much more common in our organizations across the board, outside of United We Dream also. And we have a lot of people that exit those positions and go and pursue their law degrees. So I know currently our directors are going to go and do that. But yeah, we don't have attorneys on staff right now. But we work with a lot of volunteers and a lot of allies and comrades in the struggle who are attorneys and who are there like on speed dial, right? So.
One quick follow-up on that. Those 2 board members that are attorneys, do they work in some kind of big firm or?
Right. So Frances, she's in Texas. She has her own firm. And she was working with a nonprofit, but didn't like it, so she left that and is focusing on her private firm. And then Ray, who's in Kansas, works for somebody else's firm. Yeah. And does immigration. Yeah, they both do immigration law. And then in terms of the art, same. Art is not just art. Art is a tool for healing. It's a tool for creativity. It's a tool for building power. And so it allows us to tell our stories. It allows us to be vulnerable with one another. It allows us to get our message out there in a real way that we can identify with. Operation Butterfly, the butterfly has become a symbol for our immigrant communities. If you look up Julio Salgado, he has been an amazing undocu artist. So artivism is a huge thing with our communities. Julio's from California. So we have a lot of undocu artists, not just painters and drawers and graphic designers, all that, but also documentarians. Tam Tran, who was part of Ideas at UCLA, produced a short documentary, like 10-minute video on somebody else's story about being undocumented. And that was really the first time that you saw a YouTube clip and anybody across the country, right, who was also undocumented maybe, could see that video and identify with somebody across the country and be like, I'm not alone, right? And that's a huge thing. So storytelling is the basic unit of our movement, definitely, and it continues to be. And art is a powerful, obviously, vehicle for sharing our stories. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree fully with what Sophia said about donor funding, and the need also for us to build grassroots funding for our work, because that's, in the long term, that's also more sustainable. I mean, I'll be honest, at Equal Education, if one of our major donors pulled out, next month, we would have to let people go and our work would suffer. And so in the long term, I think, it's actually more safe and secure. It's also, politically, it's much better to have money, which is coming from grassroots membership, but it's hard. It's very, very hard. Very, very hard. Just in terms of our organizational structure, so we've got a democratically elected leadership. So I was elected onto that leadership 2 years ago. It's a 3-year term. So in the middle of next year, we're going to have elections, and that's how it is. We've got our political leadership. That's quite a big body. It's called the National Council, and that has got representatives of students, of parents, of people from all across the country. And at the Congress, which is set every 3 years, that's when the major sort of campaign priorities for the next 3 years are actually decided upon. The National Council, we meet regularly. There's a process of consultation with the membership, and there's a process of communication as well. Now, when you talk about tensions, that's a real living tension. So we've had instances before where, in the middle of our campaign, our norms and standards campaign took us 3 years, so don't lose hope. It took us a very, very long time, and now the next phase of the campaign, which is going to be all about ensuring implementation, is probably going to take something like 20 years. But right in the middle of that campaign, after the minister had continuously disappointed us and had continuously reneged on promises, she asked for an extension. She asked for an extension from a settlement. We had a prior settlement, to actually adopt these norms and standards. And we consulted with the membership, and people had reached a point where they felt that there can be no more extensions. We need to go straight to court. Now, the leadership of the organization, and I'm one of those people, we felt that, in consultation with our lawyers, we felt that we needed we needed to give the minister one more extension, but a limited one. you know, because we were scared that if we were going to go to a judge, and because of the admission she had made in asking for that extension, they would probably be sympathetic to the minister and probably rule in her favor, and that would be a setback for the campaign, and that maybe even, you know, get a bigger extension. And so we decided then to give the minister a limited extension of a month. And the membership, most of the membership were very, very angry and upset about that particular decision. But we'd been elected to make, and we've got a 3-year term, essentially to make unpopular decisions when necessary. And in the end, it turned out to be the right decision. She asked for 6 months, and we said no, and we went back on the streets. And so, you know, and the campaign was successful in the end. But I think the issue of, you know, building real grassroots democracy and really people understanding what that means, what consultation means, what leadership, what decision making means, is something very, very important that has to be built. That understanding it needs to be, you know, what we all know and understand instinctively, because otherwise you can really, you know, tear a movement apart. Just the other thing, the last, you know, the question about arts and activism, I think that we shouldn't be scared to use art. We shouldn't be scared to use music. So that march that we spoke about, you know, of 20,000 young people, we invited 2 or 3 of the biggest artists in South Africa to come. And the march actually started off with a free concert. Mm-hmm. You know, so we had 20,000 young people that came there. They assembled. There was a concert. And from there we marched together, and those artists marched together in support of our struggle. And we've used, you can look at our material here, over 3 years, it's a long time to maintain momentum. And so we used just a range of tactics and really allowed young people's creativity to flow. And, you know, you can't just march every single week, you need to think of different ways. So we held, you know, 10 days of action within schools. We had pickets, we had flash mobs, we had fasts. I mean, we were running out of ideas in the end. But yeah, very important.
Sure, I mean, I'll just say something about the structure of the Law Center. So we are actually, we're the Equal Education Law Center, and we purposefully chose the name, you know, to have half of Equal Education's name, so the two organizations are almost immediately associated with each other, you know, for obvious reasons. But legally, we're a separate institution. We have a board of trustees that you know, is made up of education academics. We've usually got a ex-constitutional court judge. In fact, the founding chairperson of our board of trustees was the former Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court, Arthur Chaskelson. And then legal practitioners. So we've got a good mix of experience within the board of trustees that is there to kind of advise us, and then act as a trust would to hold us accountable in terms of the you know, the way in which we conduct the operations and funds, etc. We haven't you know, had too many problems with our donors as of yet. We've been able to I think quite successfully raise money in a way that gives us core funding, which is sometimes a very difficult thing to actually get from donors. But specifically because the kind of work that we're doing cannot keep us tied down to, you know, particular issues that any donor might want us to take on, and we're quite you know, we're quite stern about holding that position. But sorry, and then within the organization, besides our board of trustees, there's myself, and we have 3 full-time attorneys. We also have 3 candidate attorneys. As I was saying earlier on, one of the things that we're wanting to do is to also start building expertise in education law amongst the new, you know, young generation of lawyers. So we're a small organization, but as I say, we're a full-time institution dedicated specifically to provide legal support and ongoing support to equal education. And which also just goes back to, as I was saying, you know, the principle behind where we see the role of lawyers is that we don't want to be, the idea behind setting up the law center was that we don't want to, when it's necessary to go to court or require some kind of legal advice, to then be briefing lawyers, you know, kind of down the line. We're separate institutions legally, but we meet all the time. We make decisions collectively on the kinds of cases that we would take on. We would attend meetings that Equal Education takes on, even if there's no idea about a case that's going to happen. There's this kind of constant interaction between us, and so we see ourselves as, you know, in some ways we're part of the same family and part of the same broader organization. And then lastly, we have two equal education leaders who serve as trustees on our board. So there's also that kind of institutional overlap between the organizations.
So I'm hella bummed that we are out of time. But I think a number of people have raised the point that there are these moments that happen. Sometimes there are moments out in the world, out on the street. Sometimes there are moments in a law school where convergences take place. But our responsibility is to build a long-term movement that ultimately connects those moments into something larger. And I think just, sort of thinking about one of the themes that came out of the discussion, I'm reminded of the fact that Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Fidel Castro were all trained as lawyers, but saw themselves centrally as activists who didn't use that particular set of tools to try to change the conditions in their particular community. And so I'd really encourage people to grab some of the literature that's up here. I know that Equal Education has some, and if United We Dream and Dream Defenders don't have any, then you can certainly connect with folks. And then as a moment of self-promotion, a woman and I wound up doing a series of interviews with 150 organizers and activists across the country called Ear to the Ground. And so we wrote up a report based on those interviews. The very last thing that I'll say is that I think one of the most inspiring parts of Freedom Summer was SNCC's decision, bold and audacious decision, to say that they were going to go to Mississippi, which at that point in time was generally recognized as the worst, the most dangerous place in terms of the segregation in the United States. And they said that they were going to go there and they were going to break the back of Jim Crow segregation. And today I find myself renewally inspired by the work of the panelists. So please join me in thanking them for their work. And
just one more thing. So this Freedom Summer anniversary is not just a time for us to commemorate by remembering, but also by doing. So Dream Defenders, United We Dream, and a whole bunch of other grassroots building organizations across the country are coming together to do just that. We're building our own Freedom Summer of 2014. So we're going to be in Florida, Ground Zero, Ohio, another Ground Zero. I mean, there's plenty of Ground Zeros, honestly, today. Unfortunately, the issues continue to be issues that we are fighting against. So in Florida, Ohio, Mississippi, and Texas, thank you. Texas, we're gonna be there fighting for 4 issues in particular: against incarceration, against deportations, also around education, jobs. Again, it's our right to live with these rights, right? So we're gonna be engaging in civic enragement, as the Dream Defenders say, trying to connect with our communities and get to know their issues. So we need radical lawyers to help. So if you go to freedomside.org, it's really simple, freedomside.org, you can check us out, see what we're up to, and see if you can come help, whether from afar or at Ground Zero. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
Also, thank you to Steve. Great job moderating.
Yeah.